Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Church of Judas. Goddess bless you, Mary bless you, Mary bless you, Mary bless you, Jesus bless you, Judas bless you, I bless you, and bless yourself. And welcome to the Church of Judas. I'm going to focus on the Church of Judas for this whole live because it came up at the end of the last live and we didn't have enough time to talk about it. So I'm going to go ahead and start talking about it for future viewers until the people start to arrive. And it's just going to be people who can handle the talk about the Church of Judas in this live. So hopefully that's going to be some really awesome people, maybe some people we've seen before. Maybe we'll have to meet some new people to handle this type of information. Everybody's ready for it. I mean, the world is ready to hear about the secret plan that Jesus made to set Judas aside to come back at this time and replace all patriarchy, Christianity, war, and Trumpism. That's why the title of this live is Church of Judas, hashtag Church of Judas. Judas replaces all patriarchy, Christianity, war, and Trumpism. So, you could just say Trumpism, but it is important to specify that it's Christianity, that it's patriarchy, that it's Christianity, it's patriarchy, Christianity, and it's war, and it's Trumpism. These are all things we're getting rid of. Trumpism is, of course, this umbrella term that applies to all these different things that are good. Every one of them is good to get rid of. It includes war, but war is also something specific that we need to get rid of. Patriarchy Christianity is something specific we need to get rid of. It basically means Christianity. Not all Christianity, yeah, but pretty much all Christianity. Specifically all churches. So for all churches to be replaced by the Church of Judas, some of them, it won't be that big of a change because they're already pretty Christ-like churches, pretty truly Jesus-y churches. But on the other hand, whatever comes to mind when you think about churches and the evils of churches and the bad things that churches have done, yeah, that's all. There's a reason why that stuff comes to your mind. There's a reason why there's a preponderance of bad stuff that the churches have done. And the reason from Jesus's perspective, from the Gospel of Judas, is that these churches were corrupt and they were not intended to be corrupt is maybe not the right word, but Jesus knew they were going to be corrupt. Like, the point was to let them be corrupt. The point was that, these spiritual teachers and leaders and beings had come to earth plenty of times before, and they ruined their messages and kill the teachers. So Jesus knew they were going to do that with his message as well. So he built this thing into it so that when they corrupted his message, when they made all these antichrist churches, all these patriarchal churches, he would be able to whip the rug out from under him, be able to pull the ripcord on this escape plan, on this parachute that stops this antichrist structure. But he also knew that this antichrist structure, he knew that this would become the biggest religion in the world. And the religion that was so big in the way that these empires were going to utilize it and exploit the corruption of Jesus's religion, which we call Christianity. Now, we call Christianity Jesus's religion, but what Christianity is, really all of it, is this corruption of Jesus's religion that the empires found so useful. And Jesus knew the empires were going to find it useful. Jesus knew it was going to become this world religion, biggest religion in the world, and become the religion of these empires and their wars, and saw all these terrible things that they were going to do in his name, which would make him terrible to him. Why would he do this thing that claims to be good but ends up doing all these terrible things? And the reality, the on the ground truth of the religion is terrible. Then it would make Jesus terrible too if that was the case, or if that's all there was to it. So it's really important that there's more to it than that. And it's really important at this time that people know there's more to it than that, because it's the same situation they'll find themselves in with Trump, with becoming disillusioned with Trump and this Antichrist character they've been following. Well, to actually a lesser degree than Trump himself, because Trump really is the Antichrist or part of the Antichrist, or even specifically the Antichrist, but in a less drastic way than Trump himself. Because a lot of people who are in these Christian churches don't like Trump. They're not that bad off, but they're in these Christian churches, and the Christian churches are going to prove to be a disillusion to them in the same way that Trump is the ultimate disillusion to these people. A lot of these people's belief in Trump is conflated with their belief in Jesus. Of course, their Jesus is an antichrist, which allows them to be able to see the same and just as good in Trump. But they'll be disappointed in that. They'll become disillusioned with that, and their idea is that Jesus failed them, or Jesus betrayed them, or Jesus wasn't real, to allow them to get suckered into Trump and all this other stuff. The truth is, of course, that Jesus is real and wasn't letting them get sucked into it, or just a free will thing allows you to get sucked into it. But and the fact that it's trying to suck you in, it's a terrible organization and network and evil trying to suck you in. But it doesn't make Jesus fake. It doesn't make Jesus evil. So, but it does make Christianity evil. So one of the best ways I phrase this, I think, is to just ask people in chats or ask people when I do these lives. Do we blame Jesus for Hitler? Do we blame Jesus for Putin? Do we blame Jesus for Trump? No. You can just sense that there's something wrong about blaming Jesus for those three evil men. But should we blame Christianity for Hitler? Should we blame Christianity for Putin? Should we blame Christianity for Trump? Yes, because Christianity was instrumental in all three of those evil men, which shows you how different Jesus is from Christianity. Now, I think that's a perfect mathematical equation that I would love to have someone's live response to, but as currently 7.5 minutes in, a couple of people are coming on, but no one is in the live, so excuse me if I repeat that same set of questions later to try to make the point to people. But we were having a good conversation. We're starting a good conversation at the end of my last live, because I only go live for an hour at a time. So it was getting up to like 50-something minutes, and we were starting a good conversation. But I had to shut it down and come back live again. But since the topic was all the Gospel of Judas stuff, I figured I'd start again here. And that's actually the end of the last live was even, the prelogue to this. It was about the Gospel of Mary and how the male disciples had all gotten it wrong to begin with and gotten on the path of the corrupted path of patriarchy to begin with. But the real important thing is Jesus saw this coming. In the Gospel of Judas, Jesus takes Judas aside as a secret conversation with Judas. He also tells all the disciples to stop sacrificing animals, which didn't make it into any of the other accounts in the Bible. But they were all told that. So it just kind of gives you a rubric, or whatever you want to call it, a framework for looking through, what types of things they kept out of the Bible, such as stop sacrificing animals. But he told all the disciples that. But the rest of the stuff that he told Judas was secret. And part of what he told Judas was that it would be kept secret for thousands of years, and that he would be hated for all the time that it was kept secret, because people would have an incomplete story. But Jesus knew all this in advance. Jesus says, you're going to be hated by all the followers of this religion for thousands of years because of what I'm going to ask you to do. So you're taking on this blame and punishment. You're being this scapegoat intentionally because of what I'm asking you to do. But then you'll be revealed. Let me focus on that for a little bit, though. He's telling Judas that he's going to be blamed. And that came true. Like, everybody's hated Judas all this time. That totally came true. Like there might be some random artists and playwrights and authors and stuff, and like Lady Gaga wrote the song Judas, that have had a different take on Judas in some way. But other than that, it seems like universally, all the different churches with all their differences have all hated Judas and demonized Judas and blamed Judas. And Jesus tells Judas before he does any of this stuff, this is what's going to happen. They're going to hate you for this. And that all this is going to be kept secret. So the fact that Judas is hated by all these churches also means that Judas isn't responsible for or part of any of these churches. Judas has been kept out of all of these churches. Judas is one of Jesus's disciples, and while all the other disciples are revered by all the churches, and sometimes depending on which church it is, they revere one of the disciples more than the others because he's their disciple, the one who started their church. They revere all the other disciples except for Judas. They hate him all. Every one of them hates him. There's not an exception to that. Maybe there are in certain sects of Christianity that I'm just not familiar with at all. But all the ones I've been familiar with seem to all have at least a very mainstream belief that includes a hatred for, a scorn of Judas, which is exactly what Jesus said they would do. And he tells Judas this. He says, they will hate you for what you're going to do. So if you'll do this for me, I want you to know that they're going to hate you for it. Now, this whole conversation is very interesting because it has this presumption that Judas seems to just completely accept from Jesus that they're going to be around forever. Like he's going to know. It's not just telling you, hey, they're going to hate you and they're going to spit on your name forever, because there's another part to it where he comes back. But it seems to just imply that people are around forever, that our spirits are around forever, and that we'll therefore be aware. Judas, in whatever form he's in, will be aware for the next 2,000 years that everybody hates him and that he is kept out of this religion, Christianity. But in the end, it's it's to his credit that he's kept out of Christianity, because he's therefore not responsible for any of the bad things that Christianity does. He didn't make this church that did this evil thing. He didn't make that church that did that evil thing. He's not revered by any of these churches that did all these evil things. And it's not like that's all they've done is evil, but lots of them did a lot of evil things. And when they were doing those evil things, they supposedly had their version of Jesus and their version of all these disciples to curb their behaviors and their beliefs, but they didn't do it. Again, for some of them, anytime these churches were doing these evil things, there were people within those churches being like, maybe this is evil. Just like people are starting to wake up to Trumpism and say, wait, maybe he did all these things. Yeah. But, that becomes the exception. That becomes the lone voice, or it doesn't become the mainstream, or at least not for a long time. But if it does end up inevitably, ultimately becoming the mainstream, then that changes a lot. And that's pretty much what's going to happen. It's like the questioning voice, or the curious, the anti-authoritarian voice, the challenging voice is going to win. The outsider is going to win. The underdog, or the downtrodden, the outcast, is going to come back and win. And when you think about it, that not only fits all of our underdog championing in our culture, it fits one of the things we care the most about is an underdog or an outcast being able to come back in, but better than come back in, to come back in and take over, to change everything because of what they've been able to do as an outcast. Well, that's the dynamic we're dealing with. That's with, it's what Judas is going to do, but it's really what Jesus has done all along. Jesus has always been about the outcasts. Jesus has always been about the people that the mainstream has kept out. So, welcome back if you're just coming back to the live. I went ahead and started talking about this stuff, but you can hear the beginning in the post of this later. But so when Jesus tells Judas he's going to be hated by all the churches, by all people for 2,000 years, that comes true. And it keeps Judas out of all the churches, so he's not guilty of all the things that the churches are guilty of. He's not part of that. And he's one of Jesus's disciples. but one that hasn't had influence on this world until now. Because Jesus also tells them, then you're going to be revealed. After being hated for what I'm asking you to do, you're going to be revealed. And then at the time that you're revealed, you will replace all their churches. And when I hear the idea of you will replace all their churches, what I hear is you will replace their churches with maybe something that's not even church anymore. Maybe it's something else. Replace their churches with something else. If it is church or whatever, a new kind of church, whatever, it's replacing it with that something else for all the churches. Does that mean that every church tradition and every nuance and variation of all these different churches will then all become uniform and the same? No, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean everyone's going to eat the same dishes. All these churches all over the world are going to start eating the same dishes after church or something like that. It doesn't mean anything like that. That's ridiculous. But what it does mean is that they'll all become the same church. They won't be this fracturing, corrupted trap of a fake pseudo religion that Christianity was. They'll become a religion. They'll become one church with all this variety of rituals, foods, things like that. With the exception of all these rituals, songs, things like that support patriarchy or war or Trumpism. Those things get rooted out and replaced with the complete opposite. One of the big ways this is going to change Christianity is in the conception of sin, because no matter how different churches. Oh, welcome back, Carissa. I was just getting right back into the same conversation. Thank you for coming back. This idea of sin that all the churches treat with variations to how they treat sin, but they all have the same basic conception of sin. That sin is something that you did, something that people do and did, that individual people are responsible for. And then think about that, like in terms of like the conception of stealing and poverty. Like, what's the sin? Is the sin stealing because you're poor, or is the sin making people poor? So how we look at things, we can reframe this and see that the sin is the system that makes people poor. The sin isn't the poor person doing something that they did that's against what they might generally do, or what people call ethical, because they're poor. The sin is the system that made people poor. So while Christianity has been the instrument of all these empires and capitalist structures and stuff exploiting people, it's been the instrument of those structures by one of the keys to its being the instrument of those structures is by keeping all the focus on the individual and their sin or their shortcomings or their flaws or faults or whatever you want to call it. And then, putting all the pressure on them to say, look, you have to do all this stuff to make up for that. Well, who does that take the pressure off of? It's kind of like what they did to Judas himself. They put all the blame on Judas when a system killed Jesus, right? The Romans killed Jesus, and the Jewish religious leaders and the Romans, in some form of collusion, kind of like, did Trump or Netanyahu, like, there's a collusion between the Romans and the leadership, is what I'm saying. A lot of people who are anti-Semitic blame the Jews for killing Jesus because that serves their anti-Semitic belief system. You don't hear a whole lot of people blaming the Romans or saying, wait, when the government kills innocent people, that's wrong, and that's what Jesus' death is supposed to remind us of. The government shouldn't kill innocent people. I think people were reminded of that by like George Floyd and other victims of police brutality that sparked, more recent expressions of social justice movements and things. George Floyd is like Jesus in this analogy. And in the analogy, the guy who called the police on him, or called the police because of a counterfeit bill, wasn't, calling the police because of a counterfeit bill, not necessarily calling the police on him, is like Judas in this situation. And that guy feels guilt for his role in the eventual murder of George Floyd, although he wasn't trying to murder him. He wasn't even trying to help the cops murder him. He wasn't trying to do any of that. He was trying to do something else, trying to, do his job, because his job was to report a counterfeit bill. But he feels guilt. And one of the reasons he feels guilt is because the people who are actually responsible, the cops, and the system itself that put those cops in that, gave the cops that power and gave them that, and all the stuff that the system did that contributed to that particular officer being willing and killing people. That system and those cops didn't take responsibility and aren't being held accountable and aren't guilty. So the guilt is being felt by the cashier. Well, it's the exact same dynamic with Judas and Jesus and the Romans. The governments aren't being held accountable. The religious leaders aren't being held accountable. Judas is held accountable. Judas is scapegoated instead. And then they're doing that to you. They're doing that to not just you, but all individuals, saying, you're the problem. You're the one who could be cast out for your sins unless you jump through the hoops we put up there for you. That's all patriarchal bullshit Christianity. What it will be when Judas repurposes their churches, repurposes all Christian churches, what it will be is we gather together in a church, in a community, to identify and come up with the solutions for, or at least call out so that they fix themselves, the systems, the governments. We're not focused on the sins of individuals anymore. We're focused on the sins of the systems to which we belong or are subject to change them and to make them good instead of bad, like to reverse them. And how do we reverse them? We reverse them the same way we reverse Christianity itself. We remove the patriarchy. Remove the patriarchy that enables capitalism. Remove the patriarchy that enables all this exploitation and war. And we change all these things simultaneously. And as I said in the previous live, if we can end war and patriarchy and capitalism without this whole Jesus plan, I'm not going to be mad that the Jesus plan wasn't the way that it happened. I'm going to be very glad that we did all those things. But the fact that we have this Jesus plan that ends war and patriarchy and capitalism, and it does it, it just does it. We don't have to do that much. We don't have to do much more than talk about it. And it ends patriarchy, war, and capitalism. To me, that's brilliant and beautiful and a wonderful, miraculous thing that's just really cool and something that's worth talking about, which is why I talk about it so much. Worth getting other people to talk about, because that's what talking about things is really about. It's not one person says things and other people might ignore them / walk by or whatever. It's people engage in conversation. One of the other great things about the Church of Judas, it doesn't have a hierarchy of authority. It's the authority is just the truth. Anybody can speak the truth. Some kid might be able to tell you the truth or tell somebody the truth way better than somebody else does. Hey, Breezy, welcome back. Somebody might be able to say the truth in a song or in a piece of art or a dance or something, or a meal they cook in a way that people can respond to. And that's the truth. The truth is the truth. And there's not an authority who is entitled or empowered to tell the truth more than other people. It's anybody can tell the truth, and some bird flying by can be what tells you the truth at some point, or it makes you realize, hey, this thing that I was just thinking, that bird flying by when I was thinking that thing made the thing that I was thinking seem more true, or maybe draw attention to the fact that, hey, I was thinking that when that bird flew by. So truth is happening all the time. It can come from anybody, and there's no authority in it. The authority is the truth itself. Chris Lynn says, I'm not religious, but I respect and understand what you're saying. Well, thanks for listening to me. I thought, I appreciate you understanding it too. The reason why I think most people in America and the West are not religious or ex-Christians is because Christianity is shoddy as fuck. But I think it's really interesting that this really shoddy religion that's been used to do all these terrible things, all these empires and stuff, and it's done good things too. I'm not trying to discount the good things that Christianity has done along the way. But the fact that it's been used by all these empires to do slavery and war and boarding schools, kidnappings, abuse, all this terrible stuff, like systematically do a bunch of terrible stuff. The fact that there's a redemption for that, But it doesn't make it all worthwhile. But like, okay, for all the terrible stuff the church has done, what if once you've taken over the Catholic Church and the Mormon Church, for two examples, two of the richest organizations on the planet, and then you say, we might be keeping some of these buildings or most of these buildings, although we'll be repurposing the activity in those buildings to some degree. Some of the same activities will keep occurring. But we're going to take all these riches, all this massive wealth, and give it back, reparations style, to all these people that we've hurt as much as we possibly can. We'll be just on a mission to liquidate all the vast hordes of wealth that we have in order to make up for, to show some type of atonement for, and to try to repair what's left of communities that we were actively destroying for centuries. So that's one thing we do, like reparations, like set the standard or start the standard for reparations to all sorts of communities, just with the wealth of the Catholic Church, the Mormon Church, the Evangelical Church, all the churches. Remember, we're taking all the churches. Church scared it out of me. Okay, that's what Carissa Lynn says. Church scared it out of me. So yeah, so you had church experiences. I think that's what most people have, is they have this experience in church, and some churches are better than others, whatever. But even in good churches, they're subject to these centuries. Like a good church is a church that's kind of broken off in some progressive way from a more conservative, more fundamentalist root or something. That's just the progress of Christianity. They don't all get more progressive. Some of them get way worse. Some of them get more fundamentalist and more patriarchal, like worse than the mainstream. But yeah, churches did get better. There's always been branches of churches. And why? Because you're talking about Jesus. Now, Jesus isn't actually vibing with these churches. Like I was saying earlier, the churches are antichrist. But it doesn't mean that Jesus isn't there. Jesus isn't available. That individuals slash movements within churches don't branch off and become new and have more Jesus-iness to them. There's the public universal friend who transcended gender, but they also, part of the reason they transcended gender is because they only accepted male preachers. Or you could say psychologically, part of the reason they transcended gender, or you could say transcending gender was important. They also believed in chastity, which to me is a mistake. And it goes deep into Christianity, like this original sin kind of concepts, and Eve being bad and things like that. But again, once you remove that from the Christianity, once you say, well, wait, what would Christianity be like without patriarchy? What would Christianity be like when it's actually pro-woman and pro-sex and pro things like this? Pro-love things that you would think a love religion would be about. And it would be drastically different than it is now. Carissa says, I was put on a stinky blue bus. I was the only child that wasn't white. Several Sundays, my mom sent me on that bus. On a bus to go to church. 3 lightweights took me into a back room and told me I was going to hell. Well, that's terrible. And why? Like, just, again, to scare you into accepting their beliefs. So all the things you know and sense are wrong about Christianity are wrong about Christianity. But that doesn't go back to Jesus. Jesus actually is, this divine being who, or I can't claim to characterize Jesus, but I'll just say Jesus is this divine being. We're all divine beings, but Jesus is this like super divine being, right? Super great divine being who had referenced, all the prophets we send to Jerusalem, you kill all the prophets we send, something like that. He referenced previous prophets that he's a part of a heritage of. He referenced this to me to suggest an awareness of, not only do you kill the prophets when you should be listening to them and stuff like that, but the influence that they do have, you then take that and turn it around backwards on itself. You reverse the influence that these prophets have to make these sham religions that aren't good, to replace what the good religion that would have grown if people had obeyed the prophets, had listened to the prophets. And of course they did the same to him. They killed Jesus and they turned his religion into a sham of itself to enable war and slavery and oppression and all this stuff. because they always do that. But Jesus knew they were going to do that, so he put a trap in it, and that's what Judas is. He put this escape clause in it. Let me read your comments. Breezy says, not every church is like that. I'm sorry you had that experience, Carissa. Yeah, they're not all like that. Some are a little bit better than others, but the ones that are better are fringe. The ones that are, the badness of it is the mainstream. And it goes back to like Peter and Paul. It goes back to these disciples being not as good as they could have been. That goes back to, as I was talking about in the previous life, the Gospel of Mary. Mary was the one that Jesus said the disciples should listen to. Mary was the authority. This is Mary Magdalene, who some people say was Jesus's wife, who some people say Jesus had kids with. Mary was the one who understood Jesus in a way that she was appointed to be the authority for decision making, I presume, the authority for teaching, the one that they would listen to as the authority. And again, as I was saying before, it's not about who people appoint as an authority, although you can imagine when Jesus appoints an authority, maybe we should accept that. But it's not about who people appoint as an authority, it's about, or the system of authority, it's about the authority of the truth. But Jesus was just saying, in my opinion, Jesus was saying, Mary knows the truth. Mary Magdalene is the one amongst you who knows the truth of this far more than any of the rest of you, so you should be listening to her. And then when she tried to remind them that Jesus said that, nobody said, Jesus didn't say that. He meant this instead. Nobody debated what Jesus said. It's like everybody accepted. They all knew. Yeah, Jesus told us all to listen to Mary. But what they did instead was not that. And Peter says specifically, because the world respects the judgment and expressions of the leadership of men, then I should be the leader because I'm a man and you're a woman. And that was his reasoning. Jesus told them to do the opposite of that. So that's the first antichrist. That's the first patriarchy. The fact that patriarchy came in, as soon as Jesus was gone and corrupted the first church leaders, is what the corruption is. So you have to root out the patriarchy all the way to that point, all the way back to the beginning, and in every instance, in every part of Christianity that it appears. But I also agree with what Breezy's getting at, that some churches are better than others. But it doesn't mean anybody needs to go back to church other than maybe to tell them, hey, you're getting replaced by the Church of Judas. Have you heard this news? This is going to unite the churches. This is going to make the churches actually a fitting body for Jesus and Mary and, the truth of a love religion that got almost completely turned inside out or completely turned around. Chrysalin says, I'm biracial. They felt that interracial relationship was a sin. Yeah. I'm from the South, so I've heard just people say this in casual conversation. And yeah, it's extremely damaging and disturbing. I just remember being a kid at a passion play and these old white ladies, commenting on probably a white girl's biracial babies, and saying something like, well, that's, it might be a sin, but they're so pretty. They're just such pretty babies, and it's like, just that. It's that terrible idea that's not true, but it's like, okay, so that's a sin because of their racism. But sex itself is a sin. How are we supposed to get here? Like, how are any of us supposed to get here in the Christian worldview that makes sex itself or being a woman a sin or anything wrong with? And again, and then it gets back to what I was, if you were here in the last life, which I know you were, Carissa, but I'll repeat for everyone else. It's not about our sins. They've turned it into this thing that's about our sins. It's not about that. It's about the sins of the system. And that's what the whole reversal of Judas does. Judas was the scapegoat. Judas is the one that they blamed and we blame instead of blaming the system that killed Jesus. We blame ourselves for what goes wrong with us or when we do something wrong instead of blaming a system that put us in a position to even think about doing that wrong thing or to have, the problems that we have because we live in a bad system. So let's fix the system. Let's make it a system that takes care of people so that people can be as good as they can possibly be and not have these types of problems. Seahound says, oh no, it's you again. And it will be me again. Or next time it'll be you. Like you'll actually listen to what I'm saying And you realize that better than trolling people's lives because you don't agree with them, you can go take a church for Jesus. You can go get a church, like it's like putting a seed in a pot. There's just empty pots laying around all over the world, and you've got a pocket full of seeds, and you can go put seeds in those pots and grow them. You can just go do that. And every church out there is a pot waiting for you to put a seed in. And you can go do it and take it. And it won't be yours like it's in your pocket, like the seed was, but it'll be yours like you're the one who seeded that church. Breezy says, I appreciate your open conversation and kindness, Euless. Thank you, Breezy. Euless is just the name of the YouTube channel. You can call me Puffin. I go by Puffin. Fly a kite. I love flying a kite. I met my ex, or our first date maybe was one of our first dates was flying a kite. Anyway, I don't meet her flying a kite, but because who flies kites these days? But I always want to go up. Yeah, Puffin is what I go by. So when you're looking me up, you can look me up under Puffin. Like, I'll show you my book again. One of my books again. Oh, where did the book go? Right here. Puffin's Magic Dragon Fairy Tales. Here's my real name is Andrew. Puffin's Magic Dragon Fairy Tales is one of my books. A book of dragon fairy tales. Mr. May is another one of my books. A book about this guy, Mr. May, who says meh to everything. And then I wrote a book about all this Judas stuff. It's called The Book of Judas. It's a little bit bigger of a book. But I'm writing another book about that, but I also do a lot of content on YouTube about it. Just check out the hashtag Church of Judas. And it's the final form of Christianity. It's what replaces Christianity. And it's what makes Christianity something suitable for Jesus and Mary to be, their body, to be their garment, their church. And up to this point, it hasn't been good enough. It's been wrong in a lot of different ways. And we've seen that wrongness. Love is my religion. Ziggy Marley, yeah. And that's what it is. It is a love religion. But to the extent that Christianity hasn't been a love religion, it's gonna be great. I'll put it that way. Like, it's gonna be the opposite of the bad things about Christianity. The judgment, the exclusion, all this stuff. Instead of exclusion, it's going to be inclusive. Instead of judgmental, it's going to be accepting and supporting. Yeah, I say goddess is love. That's another thing about the Gospel of Judas. I'll go ahead and tell you a little bit about it. Jesus, it's what we have of the Gospel of Judas is only about the second half, because we know that a lot of the beginning part, we don't have that. We didn't think we had any of it. When Jesus says, you're going to be kept secret, like you, Judas, are going to be secret and hated. You're going to be hated since no one's going to know this secret, so everyone's going to hate you. So y'all understand how that happened, how that came true. No one's going to know this secret that I'm asking you to do this, and so everyone's going to hate you. But then you're going to be revealed. And the reason why it was secret is because the Gospel of Judas, when it existed in the 1st and 2nd century, well, the Romans or the Christians, somebody went around and destroyed it as much as they could because they didn't want that information out there. But because they were so successful at destroying it, it was a secret. So by trying to obliterate it or make it non-existent, they actually fulfilled part of Jesus's prophecy to Judas that it would be a secret. Then they found a copy. They found one copy, or they found a copy of half of it, and still missing parts, from deterioration and stuff. But they studied it, and the scholars got a English translation of it, which is another really interesting thing. Is a lot of these other Bible books we have been translated like bunches and bunches of times, and every time they translate it, people have different translation biases and stuff or even unconscious biases that creep into the interpretations. Well, this has been translated once. It's from the original Coptic, and then they translated it into English for people to be able to read it in English. And there's still some mysterious stuff in it, but a lot of it's really pretty plain and clear. And so where it picks up, because we're missing some of the beginning, But where it picks up is Jesus is laughing at the disciples. And he doesn't laugh in the Bible, but he's laughing in this account. And he's laughing at them because they're praying over their food. And he's basically because they're saying, I guess, some ritualistic prayers that they said because they're like uh, just in their, I guess most of them were Jewish. So in their Jewish traditions, they're saying their prayers. And he's laughing at him. He says but something to the effect of, you don't even know who you're really praying to. And then he says to all the disciples, none of you are fully appreciative of me, something like that. None of you can know who I truly am. Or none of you can stand up to me, something like that. Judas actually stands up to him. The rest of them can't even do that. Judas stands up to him face to face, but he can't look him in the face. Like that's too much of a challenge or something. But he can stand face to face with Jesus in this moment when, after Jesus said this, none of the other ones could do it. And then Jesus still kind of says something like, I don't think you're going to get it. You know, how do I know you were going to get it? Something like that. And Judas says, I know you're from the immortal realm of Barbelo. Now, Barbelo is a goddess name. It's the ultimate divine, and it's perceived as a feminine ultimate divine, Barbelo. He says, I know you are from the immortal realm of Barbelo. To me, that reads as saying, look, you're not from this God that the Jewish tradition worshipped. You're not even from that God. You're from something above that. You're from this goddess above that. So to me, that God, the reason why Jesus laughed at them for worshiping that God when they weren't seeing where he was really coming from or who he really was. Love, love itself. That they're worshiping this God who's false, who, even if it is a real God, is just, an obstacle God, a not the ultimate divine good God, or possibly even a bad God, or not even real, just a misconception that serves as an obstacle that gets in the way of the goddess. Let me read your comments. So it's a really important thing to me that because when Jesus says, y'all don't know who I'm from or where I'm really from, and Judas says, I know you're from the immortal realm of Barbelo, that's when Jesus says, okay, we can go have this secret conversation. And then they start having a secret conversation. These secret conversations take place in the Passover week leading up to it. It's got a little different timeline than the Bible, which is itself very interesting. Love is my religion, Ziggy Marley. Everyone should listen to that song. I wish we could just play it in here right now. Breezy says, God is love, though. The people mess it up. Yeah, well, exactly. The people, including the original disciples, messed it up. Also, when you look at this, if Judas was doing what Jesus asked him to do, then he wouldn't have anything to feel guilty for when Jesus got arrested. And he probably didn't do himself in. But maybe one of the other disciples did. Or maybe, Romans did or somebody else did. But the point is that the way they told the story as if he did himself in is covering up for the real murderer. Carissa Lynn says, sometimes I catch my dog glaring at me across the room. Or he's squinting. I don't know. He's like a grumpy little old man. This cat, I have no idea what this cat's agenda is, but it has such an agenda. Breezy says, cute, grumpy dog. Carissa says, he is cute. Little old man, baby pup. We had a dog that seemed like the Emperor of China. Breezy says, old man, baby pup. Interesting, Puffin. Thank you. So, after Jesus and Judas start having this secret conversation is when he tells them a lot of things about like the cosmos and like generations and things that I don't understand. I don't even claim to understand that stuff. But then he tells him this thing about how all the churches are going to go evil. Actually, all the other disciples come up because they get freaked out one night. They all have the same dream, although nobody seems to comment like that's a weird thing to happen. They all have the same dream where they see these kind of terrible things happening around this temple of Jesus's name. And Jesus is like, yeah, what you guys saw is your churches. All the terrible things you saw all these people doing around this temple in my name are your churches, the churches that you're going to make in my name, doing all these terrible things. And Breezy asked, do you study just from the Bible or from a Bible study channel or book, etc.? All this is just I was raised, my family are preachers and priests and stuff. But so I was raised around a lot of Christian stuff, like in the Bible. But this is all based on the Gospel of Judas. The Gospel of Judas wasn't revealed to humanity until 2006. It's from the first century, but it's probably what Jesus told Judas. I mean, people were really good about trying to keep faithful accounts of things back then because it was important information. If you were going to tell a story to somebody or get somebody to write down a story, you were going to try to probably get it really exact and keep it exact and so on and so forth. So this Gospel of Judas is from the first or second century. We know from Roman historians that it had been destroyed. It had been completely destroyed by the end of the second century. But it had probably existed from Jesus' time. It's probably one of the earliest accounts of Jesus that we have. And we didn't have it. We didn't have a copy of it. And that copy had not been translated for the world until 2006. So that means that some of the first things that Jesus tells Judas in their secret conversation in the Gospel of Judas came true because the people destroyed it, because the people so vigorously destroyed it. And Jesus apparently knew that they were going to destroy it and that we wouldn't find a copy until 2006. And he knew that these churches were going to do all these terrible things. Because when the disciples all come up, whoa, you graduated school 2006. Oh, that's cool. I graduated in 94, I think. But I think I might have graduated college in 2006 because it took me a while to get through college. And I think I might have graduated college in 2004. Yeah, I think it was 2004. Almost positive. But I got a religion degree. But I didn't study this stuff. I studied like Buddhism. But this is all from the Gospel of Judas and my understanding of the Gospel of Judas, especially as it fits in with the Gospel of Mary. The Gospel of Mary was discovered in 1896 in a convent, like a Catholic convent where nuns live. And I guess they'd had it the whole time, but then they found out what they had and it became published and known to the world. The only gospel found out after that was in 1945. They found the Gospel of Thomas and published the Gospel of Thomas, which is really cool and interesting. I read that when I was a kid too. And then I read the Gospel of Mary about 10 years ago. And I read the Gospel of Judas when it came out, I think in 2006. And then the Gospel of Judas is the most recent gospel they found. So those three are the last they found in 100 something years. Gospel of Mary in 1896, Gospel of Thomas in 1945, and Gospel of Judas in 2006. And the information in the Gospel of Judas about it being kept secret came true by being revealed in 2006. If they had copies before, or it just shows that Jesus knew this was going to happen. But so does him interpreting the disciples' dream. The disciples say, we had this disturbing dream. And he says, this is what your churches are going to do. You guys are seeing the future of your churches. And it's not like he was expecting them by having seen that to change their ways or something. This is just how it's going to be. And I don't blame that on Jesus. I don't think, oh, Jesus knew that Christianity was going to do all these evil things. Why did he even let it happen? Because my understanding of some other things Jesus did say in the Bible about Jerusalem killing all the prophets before him is that he knew that they always take spiritual people's teachings and turn them into something that they're not. And he knew that the way his teaching would be misused would be so powerful for these empires and slave masters and all this other stuff that it would become the foundation of empires, which it did. Portuguese and Dutch and English and American empires are some of the biggest empires that have ever existed, and they've all been supported by Christian empires. All right, have a good night, Breezy. It's good to see you. See you next live. I always talk about this stuff, or I can always be steered into talking about this stuff again if you ever have an interest in it and you catch me in a live again. If I'm talking about something else, just ask me about Judas stuff and dive right in, because I really think it's very powerful stuff to talk about. Um, so, and sweet dreams. So when the first things that Jesus says are going to happen. Oh yeah, back to the point about all the churches being so corrupt. We've only got about 8 minutes left. All the churches being corrupt is something that was a trap for these empires. So that when you replace these churches, the drastic change of the churches by reintroducing Judas to the churches now, is going to create such a drastic change in the churches that they just radically change. And that doing that will radically change these empires and these governments that have been built upon them. Like here in America, they fancy themselves as this Christian government, the bad guys do. And when you find out, hey, well, this is what Christianity is about to actually become, and that could, be good for government, but it's also open to, it's the opposite of what this Christianity has been in so many ways. One of the main thrusts of Christianity, has been anti-sex. Another main thrust has been colonialism and expansion and evangelicalism, like spreading around the world. Reverse both of those. Sex is good. Spreading yourself around the world is bad. Like, they're kind of like reflexive things. I grew up, like I said earlier, my family were all preachers and priests and stuff. And I grew up amidst all this stuff. But I also like studied Buddhism and some other religions as a kid, as a teenager. But even having studied some things about other religions, when I got to college and started studying religion was the first time I even came aware of the idea that other religions aren't trying to make everybody their religion. That's just a Christian thing. I mean, maybe Islam does that too. But other religions don't do that. They're just doing their thing. They're not about trying to convert people to their religion. And I'm like, whoa, I just assumed all religions were trying to convert people. Well, the interesting thing about the final form of Christianity, the Church of Judas, is it's the opposite of that. It's not just not trying to convert people anymore. It's trying to convert the Christian churches to the actual Jesus stuff, yeah. But then it's trying to undo the damage that Christianity did by trying to convert people. It's trying to unconvert people. They're trying to restore cultures and religions that it was previously trying to replace or had done great damage to in the years of trying to replace them. And then when you restore these religions, Christianity itself becomes a religion that's not trying to replace or battle other religions like the Crusades and all this crap. Christianity is just a religion that's on par to exist with the other religions. So I think it's really going to unlock a lot of spiritual growth and development and inner communication by making Christianity not a um, problem child in the family of religions. Satanism is very interesting. When you think about how, in a lot of ways, Satanism can be just, calling out the hypocrisy of Christianity or opposing the hypocrisy of Christianity. Well, it kind of works the same way as the Church of Judas. I think the Church of Judas is going to have a lot in common with Satanism in that way because Christianity was wrong. So doing things right, meaning the anti-conversion, the anti-evangelism, the anti-patriarchy, just reversing all the things about Christianity that were wrong about it. And what do you not reverse? If you're reversing all the things that are wrong about Christianity, what do we not reverse? The potluck dinners, the singing. There might not be things wrong with that, but the rest of it you do. Carissa says, like how in Christianity uses it for their bad behavior. Yeah, well, they have such bad behavior systematically, and then it filters down into their individual lives and like corporal punishment for kids and freaking gender roles and just all the stuff that leads to all this Trumpism and stuff. And then they excuse Trump for his bad behavior, and then they're all being hateful and mean and evil and kidnapping people and excusing that in the name of something. It ultimately boils down to racism. Like how when they do something this is Chris again, like how when they do something horrible and it's The devil made me do it. You know, accountability. Yeah. Or that, sin, how terrible the sin was. Or I don't know if you're not old enough, but there was this um, evangelist guy, Jerry Falwell, who had this, huge fall because Falwell had this huge fall. It might have been a different guy, but I think it was him because he was with a prostitute or something. And this was back in the 90s. I think she was even a girl. But like, I mean, an adult girl. It wasn't, nearly as bad as the things that they're doing these days. But because he was caught with a prostitute, he had this, oh, I'm so sorry. He just has this real iconic meme worthy crying like apology to his community and it's just like for sex. Like they've demonized sex so much, which I had a pretty clear insight. This is just about being against women. This is just about the power that women have over people, saying that's a bad thing instead of just being like, well, maybe it's natural for women to have this power over people and stuff like that, especially when they want to exclude women from priesthood and stuff, which didn't happen in the early church. There's all these women priests in the early Christian church. I did take some Christian classes in college, and one of them was women in early Christianity. So, but then they tried to keep the women out of the church. Oh, goodness. Sex is natural and normal. Exactly. But it's the basis. I've always seen being anti sex is the basis of all this corruption in Christianity. I mean, I saw that long before I read the Gospel of Judas. But then seeing patriarchy, which is also really anti sex, fascism, really anti sex. When seeing patriarchy and as the root corruption of Christianity in the Gospel of Mary, when Peter says, well, because I'm a man, I'm going to be the leader, even though we all heard Jesus told us to listen to Mary. Because I'm a man, I'm going to be the leader. That's just patriarchy. And to see that as the initial corruption to show up, coupled with how deeply ingrained the anti-sex and it's like if people are telling people how to have sex, or people are telling people that sex is bad and there's only certain ways to have sex, and then here's the preacher authority figure doing that. That's just a setup for the preacher authority figure to take advantage of the congregation. Or one way I've always put it is, naturally people would want to favor beautiful women, probably most often, with gifts and more leisure time, because they would want the favors of that beautiful woman, just in primitive societies through civilized societies. This would always be happening until religion pops up, especially religions that say, hey, there's something wrong with sex and something wrong with worshiping these women with these gifts and giving them extra time and stuff. Because imagine over generations, beautiful women and their descendants and would be the leaders of societies for long periods of time, and people would get more beautiful, and people would have this reverence for the matriarch of the society, until some ugly guy who wants to have the power himself instead of the natural order of power being the way I just described is like, wait, sex is bad and I'm the one who's telling you what's good instead. And by demonizing sex, he creates religion. I came up with this idea because in the South they say there's something about prostitution is the oldest profession, and they say preaching is the second oldest profession. And I think they're trying to be sly about something like, well, because of the prostitutes is why we needed the preachers, because sex is bad is why we needed the God. But it's like, no, actually that just reveals their scam. The fact that they scam the power off of the natural hierarchy of women, or I don't know, other beautiful, intelligent people becoming the more beautiful, intelligent, not rulers of society, but like leaders of society, the people that people are trying to prefer with gifts and more time to do stuff, which is how they can become even more intelligent and maintain their beauty, whatever. But just the natural desire for people to please beautiful people. Well, the religious people, the patriarchal religious people, usurped that beauty by saying, well, I might be ugly, but I can scare you into this with this hocus pocus. And that's the origins of religion versus what's, would be a much more natural state without religion and then money and all these other things that proceed from that. You could just have, people doing things, and if you like somebody, you favored them with whatever favors they're willing to accept from you. So anyway, that's my theory on how patriarchy ruined things and human evolution things, and then you can see the earlier part of the life for how it ruined things in Christianity. But I got shut down live because we're at an hour, but I love you guys, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for being here with me. Talk to you soon. Sweet dreams.